Welcome back to Deviatus. We are coming at you again with another episode in October. And keeping along with the cryptozoological theme, I hope you enjoyed last week's episode with Jesse Haynes. This week I have Finding Bigfoot's own Cliff Barackman. Cliff was actually one of the first few people I attempted to reach out to get on the show, but due to his filming schedule and him being kind of off the grid and out on location, we had to wait a little while. We actually postponed a couple months just to get him back in town. So before we dive into Cliff's interview, just want to send a general reminder that we are still doing our giveaway throughout the month of October. The deadline is October 31st to win a free copy of, actually a free autographed copy of Proof the Novel from Ted Berner. If you recall, Ted appeared on episode 11, and for his episode, as well as the giveaway information, you can visit deviatus.com/Berner. So let's jump right in with our interview with Cliff. All right, today's guest is one of the 4 field investigators on the television show Finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet. Cliff Barackman joins us on Deviatus via Skype. Cliff, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So what initially caused you to focus on the Bigfoot aspect of the paranormal world?
Well, I guess I was always drawn heavily towards Bigfoots because they were monsters. And, of course, now I'm speaking about, 30, 40 years ago in the 1970s when I was growing up. As a young boy, I think it's pretty normal to love monsters. I probably took it to a little, further degree than most other kids, I guess. But Bigfoot really was kind of represented a lot of things I was afraid of as a child and stuff. But then when I really got into it in college, it was because I realized that people were actually doing scholarly work on this stuff. Whether it was the cultural or physical anthropologists who were writing papers about, the Indian oral tradition that contains Sasquatches, or these art depictions of giant hairy men amongst the Native American artifacts, or the stuff like Grover Krantz was doing about trying to figure out how these things walk differently than humans. It was that sort of thing that made me realize, wow, you know what? Bigfoots aren't only weird and funny and quirky like I like, they're monsters, but they might be real. And the important part, getting back to your question, is that it's actually a reality and a mystery that's in our own backyard, something that we can actually do something about, maybe not make important contributions to, but at least participate in. I can go camping in places Bigfoots are reported. Maybe I'll run into one. So that's what, for me, makes Bigfoot a little bit special.
Well, it sounds really exciting what you do. And, I have so many allergies. I don't think I could personally be out in the forest all the time, but I'll live vicariously through you for now.
Well, I'm happy to carry that torch for you and anybody else who wants to follow my adventures and misadventures.
Well, I noticed you said Bigfoots. So I'm kind of somewhat of a grammar nut. How often do you find people saying big feet?
Not very often. People do ask that, but to me, that's a plural of the appendage, the foot itself. And honestly, if you're a grammar nerd, I kind of am as well. I was an elementary school teacher for 14 years, after all. I know I'm using that word incorrectly, but I do that for a reason. Because really, the plural of one Bigfoot should be 5 Bigfoot. And there's a very strong argument for that. Just like I saw 4 bear on my hike or whatever. You can say bears or bear, whatever. There's kind of this or that. But the Bigfoot thing, I purposefully say Bigfoots because it stands out in the listener's ear in a certain way because it doesn't sound right. But I'm doing that to help dispel the myth that these things are it's all one individual animal. People today, I did another interview, and they asked, and the guy asked me, so why are you so interested in him? I said, well, him. Oh, no, them. It's a species. One of the huge misunderstandings out there in America is that all this stuff is attributed to one individual. That individual is seen in Florida or Northern California or Canada or Oklahoma or wherever. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous. That could not be a biological reality. So I say Bigfoots to really drive that home, that there's a whole species of these things. And I think the fact that it sounds funny to the ear helps me in that because people like yourself notice that.
You're being true to teaching form right there. Once a teacher, always a teacher.
Oh, truly. It's just that my classroom went from 30 10-year-olds to, 500,000 or 1 million people every Sunday night.
Well, what was your very first Bigfoot experience like?
Oh God, that really depends what you mean by Bigfoot experience. If you're talking about an encounter in the woods,
Sure.
okay, well, sure, I'll do that. Let's see. The first time I knew I had a Bigfoot around me, I was actually with my ex-wife at the time. We were camping at Bluff Creek, and to make a very long story short, I heard something coming down the riverbed next to us. About 60 yards away or 50 yards away, and whatever it was got right underneath us. In the brush, I couldn't see it, and it broke this. It broke something off the tree. I mean, I heard clearly a branch going snap, and this 60 to 80 foot tree just shuddered like a twig, and it scared the heck out of both of us, honestly. And that was the first time I knew I was around one. Bears don't exhibit that behavior. It was just a mind blowing experience, and so I guess that was probably the first time that I knew I was around one.
Were you frightened when you heard that?
Oh, yeah. I was terrified, actually. And my ex-wife was even a little worse off than I was. I remember we tried to get a better vantage point by backtracking a bit. We couldn't see down there. So we actually made our way down to where this thing was. By then, it had already left. I heard it go back up the creek bed. And I remember her name was Monica. So I turned to Monica and I said, Monica, whatever that was, it's got to be right up there. Let's go. And she just looks at me and very quietly says, "You're going alone." And at that point, I was honestly too afraid to go alone. And I've regretted that moment for many, many, many sad nights in my life so far. I feel like I should have gone and I had a real shot there. But, live and learn, because if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not really Bigfooting. I've made so many over the years, and that was just one of them.
Well, you've got to make some mistakes in order to I guess, grow an experience.
Oh, yeah. If it wasn't for mistakes, I wouldn't know anything at all. At least I feel like that sometimes.
Well, what I really like about the show is kind of the dynamic nature of your team. How did you meet the other team members?
I met Bobo and Matt when I was Bigfooting, oddly enough. I met both those guys in Northern California in the Redwoods back in, I don't know, maybe 2005 or something like that. It's hard to say. And we've all been Bigfooting friends, ever since, really. I mean, Matt runs the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, and I've been a member on and off over the years. I'm not a member now. I don't really affiliate myself with any group, really. I'm kind of a loner weirdo anyway. But Bobo, and Matt lives in Southern California, but Bobo lives up in the Redwoods. So I would go up there Bigfooting every year. This is back when I lived in Southern California, when I still lived in Long Beach, California. I would go up to Humboldt and go Bigfooting and stuff, and if Bobo was available, he'd come with me. So Bobo and I have spent actually a tremendous amount of time together in the woods over the years and had a lot of crazy encounters, both with Bigfoot and just other weird stuff that Bobo seems to, draw towards himself in various ways. He's a weird magnet, to say the least. I mean, his weird antenna is loud and his beacon is loud. And then Renee was kind of one of the last, she was the last person added to the team before we started filming. The network wanted someone with a degree in biology to come on and keep us all in check, so to speak. And Matt suggested her because I guess at one point Renee showed up to a BFRO expedition and told Matt about a very strange encounter she had and told them where Bigfoots live, which is ironic because she's a skeptic on the show now, but she actually turned Matt and the BFRO onto a very good Bigfoot spot in the Olympic Peninsula. So,
wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, most people don't.
Now, were you approached to do the show, or did you pitch it? And if you pitched it, why?
Oh, well, I was kind of pitching the idea around a little bit before I was approached by another network. I actually pitched it to a couple production companies. It wasn't quite Finding Bigfoot. It was a little bit different. But they told me, oh, that'll never work. No one wants to see people walking around in the woods at night on night vision looking for Bigfoot. Lo and behold, they were incorrect. But actually Discovery Networks, which owns Animal Planet, they approached me. Probably through the recommendation of Matt or Bobo, or just catching me online. Because I had a strong blog presence at the time and a website, and I had done a couple other media spots. I did a Monster Quest episode back in 2008. I took Bob Saget out Bigfooting with Bobo and my friend Flippy at one time. And, I've done this or that on television for a while. So I guess they caught wind of me and approached me and invited me to give them some footage to see how well they like me. And it turns out they liked me. I just got lucky, basically.
And you guys are in your 10th season now, correct?
Oh, it's hard to say because seasons are really a function of the accounting department at the network, as far as I can tell. I know that we have gone out. I think it's 10 times, but that doesn't mean season. That's a definition I don't really understand. I'm not quite sure what a season is. But I have certainly gone out on 10 different runs over the last 6 years for finding Bigfoot.
Wow. Yeah, and it is hard to define, I guess, from what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, that the shows, regardless of the show, any show in particular can be filming on location. You might not see an episode air for a year or two. Is that right?
Well, probably not that long, like, for example, we just got done filming the new season. I've been home for just a hair over 2 weeks now. And the stuff that we started filming back, I think, the last week of May, if I remember right, that'll probably be aired some early 2017, maybe. We haven't been told the date yet, so we don't really know. But it'll almost certainly be in 2017. And usually there's about a 3 to 4 month turnaround, I think, like when we're under the gun and we have a schedule we have to follow. I think they try to give us 3 or 4 months to turn an episode around with all the editing and everything.
Okay. Do you watch the show yourself?
Yeah, I watched the show. I get an advanced copy of it in front of everybody, so I can like check it out to see what they did to us, because some TV can be kind of funny. We found that out our first season. Some of the editors who are no longer working with us tried to edit it to make it a little bit more creative than it was. Like they basically edited it to leave it open whether we saw a Bigfoot or not, and we thought that was akin to being dishonest. So, I immediately went on my blog and said, nope, didn't see a Bigfoot. That was a cow or a horse, rather, or whatever. And then, that caused a big uproar in the Bigfoot community and actually in the network as well. So part of the deal with that, after Animal Planet and said, we don't want anybody to lie. You just do what you do. And, and the production company kind of changed their ways a little bit. One part of the deal with that is that we get an advanced copy of it in order to see what they made, see what they did with the show. That way, if there's any sort of misleading falsifications or anything fishy, I guess is a good way to say it, we can talk to the network about it and get it fixed before it hits the air.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that does lend a certain credibility to your experiences that are being aired.
Oh yeah. I mean, the people who don't know the show think we're all lying and stuff. And but I'm proud to say that Finding Bigfoot, we don't lie. They don't tell us what to say. They don't tell us what to do. I mean, it's television. So, yeah, do we need to take a speedboat to get to the overnight investigation spot? Probably not. That's the television side of it. But whatever you hear us say, whatever you see us react to, whatever opinions we give on whatever evidence is presented is 100% our opinion. We might be wrong sometimes, but we don't lie. And in fact, a lot of the producers and camera guys and the whole crew of people who work on our show with us, there's 16 of us out on the road. Many of them say that, this is their job, by the way, not Bigfooting, but making reality TV. Many of them say that Finding Bigfoot is the most realistic reality show they've ever worked on.
Wow. Now, do you think that being on the show and having so many years of it running has helped gather more support for Bigfoot research?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think about back in the 1970s when I was growing up, 6 or 7, 8 years old, watching In Search Of. Little did I know that the influence of that program and others at the time would lead me to where I am now. And I have to realize, there's no other way around it, that Finding Bigfoot is the In Search Of the new millennium. I have to wonder how many people I'm influencing and the show is influencing. And frankly, by the time some of these children have grown into adulthood, Sasquatches might be a proven thing, and they could actually devote their life to studying Sasquatches under the umbrella of primatology. So I'm positive the show is having a positive influence on the next generation of Bigfooters.
Well, obviously there's some element of research that goes into these locations that you visit. How do you get tips on what towns to film for a hunt, or just personal hunting for yourself outside of the show? Are they emails from people, newspaper stories, internet message boards? What do you use?
Two very different questions. Very briefly about the show. Since it is television, the episodes need to be kind of strung together into a storyline, so there's usually some sort of reason we go to an area. Very often it's a piece of compelling evidence, like a photograph or some phenomenal sound recordings or footprints or something like that, or just a whole bunch of activity. Sometimes it's a town is known for Bigfoots. They have Bigfoot festivals or something like that. So there's always some reason for us to go to an area that we get to right away in the top of the episode. And from there, whenever there is Bigfoot evidence around, there's usually Bigfoot sightings and a history thereof in the same area. And that's how we get to an area. And then we can like start weeding through witnesses, using the BFRO database and my own personal database, as well as reaching out to Bigfoot researchers who live in that area and asking them like, hey, you have any really compelling witnesses that maybe we want to interview for the show or whatever. So that's how we choose the locations for the show. And then that's also how we get in deep into the local Bigfoot community, But as far as my own personal research, which is almost exclusively done up in Mount Hood National Forest, I live in Portland, Oregon. So Mount Hood is just a stone's throw away. Although you'd have to have a really good throwing arm to make a stone's throw, honestly. And the surrounding area, the Coast Range, and a little bit up in Washington and stuff too. I have a certain number of spots that I like to go to, and I try to go to the same spots. My two best spots are, I call them the Blueberry Bog and also Will Call Hill. Those are the two best spots because I've had more consistent action at those two locations than anywhere else I've ever been. And it's not 100%, but it's like 50% or better, which for Bigfooting, it's, if it were baseball, that I would be like, like amongst the best in the world. I'd like a Hall of Famer, But anyway, so I go to those spots again and again. I rarely go to new spots because I think that for Bigfooting, the most effective way to get evidence and to get activity is for me to become a predictable feature in their environment. And that involves going to the same spot again and again, driving the same car, camping in the same spot, doing the same things, wearing the same clothes, making the same noise, going to bed at the same time, taking the same walks, doing the same thing. You get the idea. I'm being a little monotonous about it for a reason. Because Bigfoots are so suspicious and so untrusting and so observant. You have to do those things to get them used to you. And then eventually, I'm still working on it because unfortunately I'm on the road so much that I can't be as consistent as I want. Eventually, I believe they will let their guard down a little bit and maybe make some mistakes. Maybe let me see it. Maybe let me film one. Maybe they'd come into camp. Who knows? We'll see.
Do you go so far as to plan for the same trips to the same locations at the same time of the year?
Oh, I just go as much as I can. I can't really go, that would be the ideal thing to do. But again, I'm on the road. Like I think this past year, I've been on the road for 7 or 8 months. Mm-hmm. So I just can't get up there with any consistency. Although both of these spots would be snowed in for most of the year. So I wouldn't need to worry about getting there the same time of year. Although the Blueberry Bog, I call it that because just the phenomenal amount of blueberries in the area, and it's a swamp as well. The blueberries are in bloom there from the second half of July until about now. So that's the season I hit it. I go there before and after just to see if they are there. And I've had them there once or twice, but not as consistent as when the blueberries are there.
Now, do you consider Bigfoot to be closer to animals or closer to humans on the scale?
Well, to be fair, humans are animals. We're not plants after all, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's maybe if you rephrase that question, like closer to the known apes or humans, I think that might be a more appropriate question because they're clearly animals, just like we are. Now, as far as the ape thing goes, you can picture apes to be spread out on a gradient. On one, like a black to white gradient, with grays in between of various shades. On one side, you have gibbons, which are the lesser apes. And on the other side of that gradient, you have human beings, the supposedly most advanced ape, right? Mm-hmm. And all the other apes are somewhere in between. Chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, gorillas, both the lowland gorillas and mountain gorillas, and Sasquatches. They are somewhere in between there. We all are. We're one big, happy, biological primate great ape family. And so where the Bigfoots are on that gradient is kind of up for debate. I put them squarely between the other known apes and us. They have a lot of characteristics of the other apes, morphology, feeding habits, some social habits, but they also have a lot of things that are seemingly distinctly human that clearly are not, because Bigfoots do them too. Like, I personally believe that they're actually talking to one another. I don't know what they're saying. I don't know how advanced their language is, or even if it qualifies for language. It might just be proto-language. But the array and complexity of the sounds they make indicate language of some sort. So I think that they're somewhere between the other known apes and us. I would say that in some ways they're smarter than us. They can survive in the woods where we can't, obviously. But of course, they're not using fire or driving cars or, playing with iPads. So, somewhere in there.
Right. So obviously you've been doing this a very long time. What has changed over the years that you've been investigating in your understanding and research of Bigfoots, and how has it changed your approach as you search for evidence?
I think the number one change that I can see from maybe the early 1990s when I got interested in this to the level I am now, and today, is the technology that's being used. That's the number one thing that's changed, because really Bigfooting hasn't changed, unfortunately, which is sad because we've gotten almost nowhere in the last 50 or 60 years. But the technology has helped quite a bit. For example, audio recorders. No longer do we have cassette tapes. We have digital audio recorders that can record all night long, one giant file. You don't need to flip that 45-minute on each side cassette tape. Or thermal imagers. Night vision technology in general has really dropped in price. Units that used to be $20,000 or $30,000 are now in the $5,000 or $6,000 range. And actually, they're better than the old ones too. And so, as more and more people get a hold of this night vision technology, we can expect, and we have seen, more and more Bigfoot evidence to come forward. And that's the thing, I'm a Bigfoot researcher. And but there's only one of me, there's a lot of Bigfoot researchers, but few hundred that go at it with any regularity at all. And I think that's probably a little high. There's maybe a couple thousand, internet Bigfooters that enjoy the participation in the community and discussion, but not a lot of guys are out in the woods. Not a lot of women are out in the woods either, for that matter. I don't want to limit to the guys, because some of the best Bigfoot researchers I know are women. But there's a lot more people in the general public than there ever will be of Bigfooters. So the more people in the general public that get a hold of night vision technology and thermal imagers and cell phone cameras and this and that, the greater the odds of getting Bigfoot evidence, photographic Bigfoot evidence is. And in fact, most of the best pictures of Bigfoots that I'm aware of have come from the general public. Almost none of them. A couple have, but very, very few have come from Bigfoot researchers.
Now, out of all the types of Bigfoot out there, there's the Yeren, the Orang Pendek, the Yowie. There seems to be so many varieties. Is there a particular one that stands out as your favorite? And if so, why?
Oh, well, it's got to be the Bigfoot, because it's here in North America. And remember what I said earlier, is that Bigfoot is something that I felt I could do something about. Mm-hmm. I never thought I'd be going to Australia or China to look for these things. And I luckily have, but from the blessing of the show, of course. And the Orang Pendek also. But like Bigfoots, to me, are my focus. Although, to be fair, I do run something called the Orang Pendek Project. Orang Pendeks are a smaller bipedal ape found in Sumatra. In Indonesia. And when we went there a number of years ago, I think it was in 2012, if I remember, we went there, we were talking to witnesses, and a lot of the witnesses we spoke to had seen Orang Pendeks just in the last few months. And I was thinking, well, that's unusual. That's not even true for Bigfoots. So I kept contact with my guides and some other people over in Sumatra. And I said, hey, if you hear about one of the local farmers having an encounter, why don't you go ahead and check it out for me? I'll pay you for your time off of your farm and away from your job, because it's not that much with the exchange rate and stuff. And if there's any footprints that are found, cast them. And that started, and lo and behold, it can be done. You know, if you empower the locals, stuff happens. Before I started this project, I think there were 2 or 3 footprint casts of the orang pendek in existence. And now that I've been doing this project for the last, 3 or 4 years or something, I think I have over 50 now. So even though Bigfoot is my favorite of the hairy hominoids, I'd say the orang pendek is a close second.
So that's a lot of footprints. You said 50?
Yeah, but I have about 50 footprint casts. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's somewhere in the 50 range of the orang pendek, and also the orang gadang, which is an almost unheard of unknown primate that lives in Western Sumatra. If you dig deep into the literature, you can find references to it. Like Ivan Sanderson mentions it, I think, very briefly once. But almost there's one other book that I think mentions it, and there's another book that the title escapes me. But what is it? But this guy goes looking specifically for the orangutan, but unfortunately, it's more of a travel log than it is a research into a primate thing. So, but orangutans have now surfaced as well, and as I know, I've heard of one other cast of an orangutan outside of my project, and I'm working on getting a hold of that cast. So, yeah, I don't know. It's super interesting though. Like that was one of the surprises with the orang pendek project, is that I went looking for one unknown hominoid, and now I suddenly have 2.
Wow, I've never heard of that one, the orangutan.
Yeah, very, very few people have. And of course, there are so many local names for the orang pendek over there and the orangutan. It's kind of hard to sort things out. And then there's also the complication that there are orangutans in Sumatra as well. But the footprint casts that I have of both the orang pendek and the orangutan look nothing like an orangutan footprint. So I'm confident that we're dealing, barring hoaxing or something like that, I'm confident that we're dealing with 2 separate species.
What do you feel, after all these years on the show, is the most compelling evidence that you and your team have that suggests Bigfoot is really out there?
Well, I think that the most compelling evidence for Sasquatches is the congruency of all of the available data. And what I mean by that is like when you look at footprints, footprint castings, you can kind of infer the underlying bone structure and morphology. Dr. Grover Krantz did some recreations of the inferred bone morphology, and so has Dr. Meldrum. Well, it turns out that when you do that, based on footprints like the 1982 Grays Harbor cast or the Cripplefoot cast from like 1969 or 70, like when you look at the inferred morphology underlying the foot there, you find that the heel is elongated, right? And that has to do with the biomechanics, basically, and the leverage of the foot, and that sort of thing. You can read about it in Grover Krantz's excellent book if you care. Mm-hmm. But that elongation of the heel, you can see that in the Patterson-Gimlin film. Mm-hmm. You can actually see how the heel is elongated to some degree. Or Dr. Jeff Meldrum did pioneering work back in 1996 detailing the flexibility of the Sasquatch foot based on footprint casts. And you can see evidence of that in the footprint cast. Now, of course, the footprint casts that he studied were available since the 1960s, but nobody had the anatomical expertise until Dr. Meldrum got involved to explain these things that were being seen in the footprints, mid-tarsal ridges and pressure discs and things like that. Well, it turns out you can see that same flexibility in the Patterson-Gimlin film. You can see her foot bend and the toes bend way up. The flexibility of the Sasquatch foot is astounding. Or we can go to the historical newspaper accounts back from like 1820s and stuff. They are describing the same creatures that people are reporting to see today. And more importantly, they're describing the same behaviors back then in the 1800s that were not explained in any ape at all until Jane Goodall went to Gombe in Africa and studied chimpanzees in the 1960s. So again, you can look back in historical newspapers from the East Coast and Midwest and stuff and find reports of Bigfoots doing things that we didn't know any ape did until the second half of the 20th century. So the congruency of all the available data is mind-blowing. And that's not even to mention the native accounts and stuff. So, and there's so much that coincides and supports and corroborates with one another that it if this is a hoax, which I'm absolutely positive it isn't, but for people who say that this thing's a hoax, they have a lot of explaining to do.
Well, since we're talking about hoaxes, what do you think would I guess what would someone need to do to create a sort of believable hoax?
In what form? Like a hoax report, a hoax footprint line, a film, a photograph? What do you mean?
Well, I guess anything. I'm sorry, I'm coming up with this question off the top of my head, but I see a lot of YouTube videos, right? And YouTube is like the place you go to find fakery. But what do you look for? Let's say in the context of a town hall meeting, what do you look for in a story or personal experience where you just can tell the difference of, that person's making this up versus, hey, this might be something legitimate we should seek further?
Well, first of all, you can't ever really be 100% sure, I guess, with just witnesses that you meet off the street. Because I think it takes a lot of getting to know a person and building a relationship with someone to really understand if they're the kind of person who would lie and hoax and, do all that sort of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But in town halls, we always look for stories that either have some sort of supporting physical evidence, like a footprint cast or photograph. And also we look for interesting behavior that perhaps the most witnesses it would be unlikely for most witnesses to know about. Because witnesses, if they're going to make something up, they could go mine the BFRO database and learn about a bunch of stories and just spit one out. That's a collection of a lot of other details from a lot of other stories. That's totally doable, and I'm sure there are plenty of hoaxes out there like that. Although, to be fair, I have to wonder what that means for the lying witness's mental state. What kind of person does that? I mean, they think I'm crazy for thinking Bigfoots are real. I have harsher things to say about hoaxers. What sort of mental unbalance do they have is what I wonder. Why do you care? Why are you hoaxing Bigfooters, first of all, and making us spend time and money on your nonsense? That doesn't make any sense to me. But going back to how I can tell if people are lying, I'm not 100% by any means, but I was an elementary school teacher for 14 years, and I got pretty good at reading body language. Why didn't you do your homework? And then they feed me this cock and bull story about whatever. I don't have to listen to the words as much as I have to look at their body language. And I find that there's very little difference between a 10-year-old and a 45-year-old. And I'm living proof of that. So I just kind of try to read their body language, listen to their stories, listen for things that seem too cliche. If all the cliches are there, the smell, the this and that or whatever, then they're probably lying, but maybe they're worth checking out. Because I will say, I've thought some people were lying, but looked into their account anyway and discovered things like footprints that they weren't aware of. Or I found other corroborating witnesses around that have observed the same thing that they weren't aware of. A lot of times, I think, not a lot, but sometimes I think people are lying and I look more deeply and suddenly they're not. So I don't know, it kind of goes both ways, honestly.
Well, you bring up definitely some good points. Evidence aside, was there a particular favorite experience you had while filming the show that you'd like to share?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there have been so many. The show's blessed me with just any number of weird adventures and strange things and close encounters. And, one that pops into my head is crash landing in a hot air balloon in New Mexico with Bobo. That was, of course, a misadventure that could have gone very differently, and I'm lucky to be here at all, honestly. But that was an awesome adventure. Looking back, I got to go looking for the Loch Ness Monster. I think that's kind of cool. I mean, it was a Bigfoot show, but we're in Scotland. We might as well go looking for the other biggie, right? Gosh, I don't know. There's just so many. In Australia, we got to climb to the top of that. What is it? The Sydney Bridge. That nobody gets to do that. We got a private tour of the Pangboche Monastery in Nepal, and got to look at the recreated Pangboche hand and Yeti scalp. I think that was neat. Mm-hmm. Going to the Patterson-Gimlin film site with Bob Gimlin on horseback. What can I possibly do now to beat that? In fact, that's a big concern of mine, really. I've gone to the PG film site with Bob, I've done the Boggy Creek thing. I've gone Bigfooting on the Stehelas Reserve up in British Columbia, where the word Sasquatch was coined. I met Jerry Crew's sons with the original, very, very first 1958 Bigfoot footprint cast. Like, so many of my bucket items have now been crossed off the list. It causes me great concern that my death is nearing.
Well, let's hope not.
I hope not too, but what are you going to do with all your bucket list items? Like, everything's crossed off. Now what?
So how many legitimate sightings do you believe you've had?
Oh, maybe one. Yes, maybe one. I saw a bipedal figure through a thermal imager back in 2011 in Georgia, North Carolina, in the Uwharrie National Forest, navigating a hillside without a light at 2:30 in the morning, 2 miles off trail. Matt chased it off. He thought it might have been a person. I'm not so sure. I think it was a Sasquatch, but we'll never know, unfortunately.
Wow. And just like you said, if you hadn't had that technology today, would you have even known it was there?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, Matt was the first guy who saw it. He saw it through the therm first. The night vision technology, the thermal imagers, have really changed the game. And the Bigfoots just haven't caught up to that one yet. Although they're still hiding at night, which kind of shows their level of paranoia and caution, is that when at night, I guess they assume we can see in the dark like they do, because they're hiding behind stuff, which kind of complicates, things a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't say I've done a proper interview with you without asking if you truly believe you would ever make a true believer out of Renee.
I would say, who cares, honestly? The reality of the species doesn't depend on anyone's belief, not even my own. They're out there. And when you're right about something, like I might have seen one, Matt's seen one from 20 feet away, Bobo's seen like 4 or 5. I've spoken to thousands of people who say they've seen them. I've seen videos of them and photographs of them. And I've been out in the woods with Renee and had rocks thrown at us in the middle of nowhere. And she doesn't know what caused it. There's no explanation from her about it. I would say it kind of doesn't matter if she believes. She can say what she'd like about it. They're either real or they're not, and it turns out they are. And it doesn't matter what people think about them, about if they're real or not. And I would, I don't really care if Renee thinks they're real or not. I don't care what anybody else thinks, honestly. I'm confident that the evidence supports their existence,
Well, thank you so much for your time, Cliff. I've really had a great conversation with you. I wish I could do this every day. Unfortunately, I can't, but thank you so much for joining me. Real quick, can you give a quick plug for the show and or your websites? How can people follow you on your current projects and get in touch with you?
Well, I'm always up to something squatchy, that's for sure. And if you want to follow me, you can either go to my Facebook page, which is, facebook.com/Cliff Barackman. I'm also on Twitter under Cliff Barackman. And my website is cliffbarackman.com. And if you can't spell my last name, just Google the words Cliff and Bigfoot, and you'll find me right away. It's a lot easier to find me than it is to find a Sasquatch.
So just want to do a little follow-up commentary on this interview with Cliff. We actually ended up speaking quite a while, maybe for another 10 minutes or so after the end of this interview. And, I think one of the first things he asked me was, hey, do you think I was a little too rough on Renee? And I personally didn't think so. One of the things that they do so well on the show is keep each other accountable. And I think Renee happens to be at one end of the spectrum regarding whatever evidence and proof they collect. But when it all comes down to it, it's really your opinion. And we live in a country where it's perfectly permissible to disagree with someone outright. I've never seen Cliff be disrespectful towards Renee or anybody that he enters any of these discussions with. So, no, I don't think he was too hard on Renee. Maybe one day we can get Renee on the show to maybe defend her stance a little and see where she's at as far as where she believes. Don't want to put her on the spot too much here, but that would be wonderful. So guys, thanks again for listening. Please feel free to stop by my website at deviatus.com. And the show notes for this episode will be at deviatus.com/Cliff. And just want to send a huge shout out to everyone sharing my social media links. I don't know if it was because I asked for it on my last episode or not, but again, that kind of stuff really makes this really rewarding for me. I always feel like kind of the odd man out when I have an interest in these types of things, and in my everyday job or my everyday life, it's not always appropriate to bring these things up and talk about them. So I do appreciate when I know that there's others out there who enjoy this kind of material like I do. So thanks again, everyone. Please stay in touch because I do have some additional very interesting episodes coming up that I know you're not going to want to miss. And don't forget, there's just a little bit of time left in the month of October to cash in on that autographed book giveaway that we're doing. So until next time, keep it squatchy.